This video is brought to you by Artistworks. Artistworks are part of True5 Studios, and they offer direct access to master musicians through their innovative online learning platform. Partnering with iconic musicians, they've crafted decades of industry experience into guided paths of online lessons. Crucially, there's an option to get personal feedback tailored specific to your playing via their unique video exchange. Get direct guidance towards your playing goals. You can use the code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of Artistworks courses. I'm more or less at the stage now where I'm a recreational jazz player. I don't really have any aspirations of expecting to do anyone particularly likes in jazz. I'm trying to make like okay sounding noises. But in today's video, I was just sort of playing on the Tokai ES335 and just thinking about how, you know, maybe certain guitars suit jazz really nicely. The tune that I was playing there was Autumn in New York. If you want the backing track, and I'm going to put together a tab for this probably later in the week, is maybe when you'll see it go up on Patreon. If you're not joined on Patreon, I put up the tabs for my Monday lessons, backing tracks, basically any backing tracks that I make throughout the week. You can request them if you want them. I, upload them periodically anyway, a bunch of them. And then also the jazz kind of stuff that I do on Sundays, I put that up, and then, as and when I see other bits and pieces. So Patreon, there's over 500 backing tracks now, so hopefully that represents fairly good value, and I think you can join. The lowest tier is £2 per month. If that's all you can afford, that's all you need to pay. You get everything for that. So I think I generally thought that it matters, I think, quite a bit which guitar you're playing jazz on. As I've done this over the years, I think it matters a little bit less. Now, I don't know if you had any thoughts on what you preferred from that introduction there, but what I was playing was Telecaster with a K-line sort of pickup in the front, which is somewhat similar-ish to like a Strat pickup, like a Lola Dirty Blonde in the bridge. A Gibson ES175 Herb Ellis, which is essentially an ES175. This has flat wounds on it. We'll come to that later. And then this Tokai ES335, which is sort of in between the two, right? This is solid, the other is fully hollow, this is semi-hollow. So first of all, the jazz sound essentially is almost always the neck pickup, and almost always you roll a little bit off the tone, or some people like Pat Metheny might roll more or less. Just a little tip. Just be careful not to roll off all the way. Although it feels really good to play, I think it can get a little bit muddy. And I found that there's a sweet spot, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10, where actually you're rolling off enough that you get that kind of jazzy thing going on, but also it's not too muddy. Now, this is strung with 11s. Now, this is, I think, the most important factor to do when you're wanting to set up a guitar for kind of jazz, because I think you can basically do this with any guitar, but if you just put on a slightly higher gauge string, so this has got 11s on it, basically what it means that when you're playing clean and picking quite a bit, you've got a bit of resistance so that you're not basically just overloading the string every single time, if that makes sense. So what I mean by this is that with a solid body guitar and sort of lighter strings, you're more likely to get this sort of thing going on where you're picking quite hard. So that'd be kind of one of my tips, is maybe consider putting on some slightly heavier strings so that you've got a bit of picking resistance. And so you're not just really easily farting out the strings. And for jazz, well, basically anything, I use a 1.5mm pick, so you've got a fair bit of resistance. The heavier strings will probably help you want to play vibrato less, which vibrato doesn't typically get used a ton in jazz. I think the Tele is probably one of the key choices that works really well for jazz, from people in the past like Ed Bickett, to people like Ted Green, to people even today like Julian Large, who uses one of these. And his kind of philosophy on this stuff, if you listen to the Corey Wong podcast, is really cool. And it means that he basically doesn't have to worry about his gear. He can travel with it. He actually takes his neck off to travel with it. And Bill Frisell, I think, does the same thing. So I think the Tele is a great choice. And the other thing with all of this is, if you don't hear them kind of side by side, I think you can get a really convincing jazz tone with the Telecaster. And even if I do hear them in context, like in the intro, flipping between the two, I think this works really nicely. and is more likely to be a guitar that you could use for a bunch of other things anyway. Probably the most recorded jazz guitar in the world, the ES175 from Gibson. Now, the downside with a guitar like this is that, to be honest, unless you're Bryan Adams, or there's a couple of rockers that have used these, Steve Howe as well, they're probably fairly one-dimensional instruments, in my opinion. Like I can't even really gig this for jazz because it feeds back so much, but at home playing it, I think it does have the warmest tone and does have the most kind of classic jazz thing going on, kind of the thunk that people talk about. The neck is a nice chunky neck. The other thing with an arch top is that the strings are way higher up generally, so your picking position is a bit different and it works really nicely, kind of a little bit like playing an acoustic guitar in some ways, but it is a different thing. This has flat wounds on it though, that's another key point, but even with round wounds I think you'd tell a difference. If you could also try putting flat wounds on something like a Telecaster, and I think you'd get some interesting results from that. They're a little bit of a deader sounding string, but they've got a bit of more of that kind of thunk thing going on. So the really cool thing that you hear it as well as you're playing. And yeah, as I say, this picking position is going to be quite different here because you've got a way thicker body and the strings are in a different place. I think of all of the guitars I played there, I find this probably most comfortable for that sort of thing. Probably the warmest tone as well. So I think this would be probably my ultimate choice, I think, except for when I use it live, it feedbacks way too easily, feeds back. And also I've had a solid top kind of Hofner New President style, and that was even worse. So for me, if I was playing this thing live, I'd have to be really careful, especially if you're playing with a drummer who was playing at any volume. Super, super easy to get these to feedback. For some reason, some folks have managed to get around this, like Jonathan Kreisberg. I'd love to know tips from some of these people, but I've not seen them yet. I think some people stuff them with stuff, but yeah. Also, the Epiphone ES175 Premium was really cool. There are a bunch of things from Ibanez, like hollow, like this type of guitar, that are awesome. PLS as well. So let people know in the comments if you've got kind of your favourite hollow body style jazz guitar. I think an Ibanez Pat Metheny was my first real one, like the Ibanez PM35. I really, really like that guitar. Bit thinner body than the ES175, bit brighter tone, but definitely does the job. And I think maybe my probably number one choice for this, because it's also a very versatile guitar like the Telecaster, would be the ES335. This is a Tokai, play authentic, but you basically get a bit of the feel of the ES175, a bit of that Gibson flavour. Probably a lot of the pickups would be similar, especially in an actual Gibson example, to what you'd find in an ES175, because they were all from the same parts bin at the time, I think. One thing, the body is not as thick, so that picking thing that's going on is not quite there, but it is a bigger body as well, so it does feel a bit more suited to this style of thing for whatever reason. But as I say, more versatile. You could use it for other things, particularly because you've got the two pickups. You could do kind of rock things, and because it's semi-hollow, it doesn't feed back in the same way that this guitar does. And I think it gets you a lot of the way there in terms of the tone and that sort of stuff. This has round wounds on it at the moment, and will continue that way for reasons of versatility. But I honestly don't think it makes a massive amount of difference, except for feel, what strings you have on there. I would just say you can play jazz perfectly convincingly with round wounds on. I mean, that's probably a debate for someone who actually plays jazz properly, but for me, I think I've had really cool sounding tones out of both. It's just that guitar, when I got it, had flat wounds on it. This one has rounds, and rounds would be what I could use for any other style of music. Flats are really only useful for jazz for me. But this kind of straddles both worlds, and of course there are loads of other different ES335 type guitars. You get slightly less of the kind of rattling stuff that happens with a full hollow body as well, so that can get annoying with a full hollow body. You can find that scratch plates rattle quite a lot, or you hear these things because they're resonating quite a lot because they are fully hollow. You get kind of rattles. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, your favourite jazz guitar. Of course, I think a Gibson Les Paul is worth a mention, because that, of course, was initially a signature guitar for Les Paul, a jazz player. Stratocaster, I think, sounds really cool for some jazz stuff. Basically, any guitar can be used for jazz. It's just those things that you show up on a gig that people are going to kind of recognize as a jazz guitar. If that matters to you, it may not. It doesn't matter to me so much anymore because I'm not really gigging jazz much. But in terms of authenticity, I think maybe the ES175 is the safest bet. And along the way, this is also a pretty safe bet, and a Tele is a pretty safe bet, I think, probably. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, and again, Patreon will be the place to get the tab for that once I've done it, and the backing track, and yeah, if you want access to all my other kind of lessony backing tracks and tabs. I'll catch you in another video soon. Please let me know in the comments what you're using to play jazz, if you are, what you found works for you. I guess an ES339 or ES330 like Keith from 5 Watt World, that sort of thing could work nicely for this. Cheers.